So let's dive into our topic for the afternoon. In the morning, as you know, we talked about the importance of words and how we define important terms, how we approach the use of words, be they in stories or in liturgy. This afternoon, we're going to be talking about the importance of deeds, what it means to do Jewish. This is actually an ongoing conversation in the broader Jewish world. We spent a lot of time a generation ago emphasizing what it meant to be Jewish. And the assumption was that being Jewish would lead to other kind of behaviors. If you explored your identity and you felt like you were part of the Jewish people and that being Jewish was important to you, then you would likely join a synagogue, donate to the Federation, send your kids to Jewish summer camp, travel to Israel, lobby Congress. There would be all kinds of other issues that you would do, that you would perform, that came out of your identity of being Jewish. The conversations that are happening now are shifting to doing Jewish. And what they mean by doing Jewish is not just who you are, because who you are, you could never do anything related to who you are, or very rarely, but rather encouraging people to try to act and connect with Jewish life by living, by doing. And that also simplifies one of the problems that came up with the being Jewish approach. Because once you're emphasizing being Jewish, you have to deal with the issue of who is Jewish, or who is Jewish enough, or what if their partner is not Jewish. And those identity questions and what I call the ethnic bouncer police, who are like policing the boundaries and saying when someone comes into a Hillel, well, is your mother Jewish? And if not, then making them feel unwelcome. That's obnoxious. You know, we're a small enough people as it is. We don't need to expel more by telling them who show up that they're not welcome. But when you focus on Jewish identity and being Jewish, then inevitably you get into policing the boundaries. If you shift the conversation to doing Jewish, then it's a different conversation, and maybe you're open to anybody doing Jewish. You know, maybe Mark Zuckerberg and his wife, who's I think of Chinese background, can make hamantaschen for pork. And that's doing something Jewish. And she can do that as much as he can do that. Who cares which one of them is Jewish? They can both do Jewish in some way. I'm sure you've all had the experience of having non-Jewish people participate in a Passover Seder, or light Hanukkah candles with your family, or have a party. There are all kinds of ways that we can have open doors to people experiencing what it means to do something Jewish. Of course, that does create its own challenge. What counts as doing something Jewish? We'll talk about that, this question of the importance of deeds. But I wanted to just open up with this conversation that the identity question of being Jewish is in some cases less important than wanting to do Jewish or have Jewish experiences. But it's not zero. There are plenty of people for whom being Jewish is very important to their sense of self. It could be their family heritage. They could have experience with the Holocaust, or with Israel, or with the Soviet Jewish experience that inform who they are. And that's an identity issue for them. It's not just what they do or don't do. And there are also people who choose to identify as Jewish. They become Jewish. Convert, we use the phrase adoption and joining the family. And for those people, the choice to be Jewish was, they could have done Jewish all they wanted to. But they've decided to become Jewish because being Jewish, the identity issue, was important to them. So I don't want to cancel identity. I don't want to cancel the being Jewish. That's still there. That's still important. But we can think also about what it means to do Jewish and expand the category of what counts as doing Jewish. If I ask you what counts as doing Jewish, if we did a survey, we would probably have people nominate things like going to synagogue, reading from the Torah, studying the Torah, holding a Passover Seder, lighting Hanukkah candles, lighting Shabbat candles, all those behavioral questions. What's fascinating is that what people actually do that counts as doing Jewish may be much broader than that. Reading a Jewish newspaper, or a Jewish novel, or collection of short stories, going to a Jewish film festival, watching Jewish movies, however you define what counts as a Jewish movie. Doing genealogy might count as doing Jewish in some way. Cooking Jewish food with the intention of having a Jewish experience, buying a Jewish cookbook and working your way through the Jewish cookbook. Those count as doing Jewish also. So it's not merely the religious performance. I get couples that come to me to do weddings all the time who apologize. They say, well, I'm not really a good Jew. I don't go to synagogue very much. And first of all, the whole category of bad Jew needs to be canceled and wiped out because it's ridiculous. But I say to them, do you celebrate Hanukkah? Oh, we do Hanukkah every year. Do you have a Passover? We always have a Passover. I say to them, it counts. Even if you're not in synagogue, it still counts that you're doing something. Because you're doing what's meaningful to you in doing Jewish. And you don't have to do Jewish all day, every day. It's okay to do Jewish once in a while. On special events. You know, lighting a yahrzeit candle around the memory of somebody's death. That's doing Jewish in a private, family way. It's not an accident that 80% of American Jews hold a Passover Seder, or participate in one, or light Hanukkah candles. But only 20% of American Jews keep kosher. Why do you think the difference? Well, one is episodic and short, and one changes your whole life all year round. One is supported by the surrounding culture. Passover's and Easter season, Hanukkah's and Christmas season. One is not supported by the surrounding culture because it cuts you off. Certainly in the culinary options in Asheville will be really condensed. If there was no bacon, no pork, no shellfish, that would be a challenge. So it's also a question of family connections. It's a question of expense because joining a synagogue or following a kosher diet is more expensive than simply doing a Passover Seder at home or frying up some latkes for Hanukkah. Those are the things that are meaningful to Jews. It still counts that they're doing Jewish in that way. Now, when many of us think about doing Jewish, we think about Jewish ethics. What's told or commanded or suggested or has been passed down to us as an expression of doing Jewish, living a Jewish life. Again, not necessarily kashrut, but most likely some concept of the word mitzvah. Now, the word mitzvah, you can make it mean something different by inflecting it differently. So in the Hebrew, the original term is mitzvah, emphasis on the last syllable. And mitzvah comes from the word tzavah, which means command, or commandment. Again, think of that blessing on Hanukkah candles. Blessed are you, God. Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav, who sanctified us with his commandments. V'tzivanu, that tzivanu, who commanded us, is the same root as mitzvah. In fact, the word for the modern Hebrew army is the tzavah. That's army, from the same idea of commandment, orders, right? And the idea is that if there are commandments, then there most likely is a commander who is commanding the commandments. At least that's the traditional understanding. You will get some people involved in conservative or reconstructionist Judaism who will speak in terms of our tradition commands us, or our inheritance commands us, and think of it in those categories. But in its original source, the sense was that there's a commander, i.e. God, who has commanded you to do all of these things. Now, the challenge with commandments is whether we think of that as ethical or not. Is it ethical to simply do what you're told, i.e. follow commandments? Or is ethics a question of grappling with right and wrong and making a judgment based on what's going to happen on the consequences? That's how most of us think of ethics. We're utilitarians, we're consequentialists, to use the academic terms. We think about, how will this affect people that I know? How does this affect the categories of thought that are most important to me? The idea of group loyalty and the sanctities of life, or the most important things to value, symbols like the flag or the cross, if you're from that background. How does it harm other people? Does it affirm their dignity or not? Those are the kind of categories we're thinking of, not did somebody tell me to do it or not. So we'll take a look at a couple examples of this. The first is a list of commandments you may have heard of before, called the Ten Commandments. Now, what's interesting about the Ten Commandments is they're not actually called the Ten Commandments in most sources in the Torah itself. They're the 10 words. Aseret HaDibrot. Doesn't use the word mitzvah for that. It uses commandments, commanding plenty of other times, but not for these. These are the 10 sayings or the 10 words. And you may recall the visual symbol of that is those 2 tablets, right? And they often will just have a short phrase on them. They don't put the full paragraph in the visual symbology that you'll see in a synagogue or in other settings. It's almost like it is the 10 phrases or the 10 sayings. But now we're going to take a look at these commandments, and as we go through them, I want you to think about, are these ethical, or are these ritual, or something else? How do I think of these? Could you be a good person if you broke this rule? Another way to think about it. So you have on the screen two versions of the Ten Commandments. I'll also point out, this is useful ammunition, by the way, if you're ever arguing with somebody who wants to post the Ten Commandments in a courthouse or a school or other place. You can always ask them, which Ten Commandments? And they'll say, what? The Ten Commandments. And you say, well, if you compare the version that appears in Exodus 20 with the version that appears in Deuteronomy chapter 5, there are some differences. Not to mention the fact that Protestants, Catholics, and Jews all break them up differently. And so the line between the first and second commandment is different in a Catholic counting than it is in a Jewish counting. So there isn't even universal agreement on what should be included in which commandment. And if you really want to do some research and be subtle and blow their mind, you could point out to them there's actually a third version of the Ten Commandments that appears in Exodus chapter 34. You may remember this first version in chapter 20 gets broken. And not in the Mel Brooks version where he drops one of the tablets. In the Torah, Moses comes down with his first set of Ten Commandments as described in Exodus 20. He sees the golden calf, and he throws the tablets and smashes the tablets. And then he has to go back up and get a replacement set. And the replacement set is described in Exodus 34. And they're very different from these. It describes 3 pilgrimage festivals. It says you will not boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. It includes other pieces that we are very surprised to see in a version of the Ten Commandments. And at the end of that chapter in Exodus 34, it says, and these are the replacement commandments that Moses brought down. Now that takes a little more research to get your evidence in place. But if you want the short version, you can point out the differences between Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. But let's take a look at each of these, given the version in Exodus 20, which is the more famous one, and we'll see if these are really ethical or something else. So the first commandment, I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the house of the land of Egypt from a house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Is that ethical? Well, it doesn't affect people necessarily. It's what? It's a little arrogant, maybe. Yeah. It's certainly saying, again, as we talked about this morning, I'm a jealous God, I have no other gods before me, only look at me. Now, one could argue, and some do, that this is ethical because you need to have one person in charge telling you what to do. If everybody gets to make up their own mind, then it's anarchy. And you need a kind of centralized authority to tell you what's right and what's wrong. That has its problems, of course. It's a more authoritarian style, and we would generally reject that approach, but that's one of the arguments it's given. Second commandment. Thou shalt not make unto thee a graven image, or any manner of likeness, of anything in the heaven above, or the earth below, or in the water under the earth. You will not bow down to them, or serve them. For I am a jealous God, visiting the sin of the fathers upon the children, to the 3rd and 4th generation of those that hate me, and showing mercy to the 1000th generation of those that love me and keep my commandments. Is that ethical? Well, people will try to argue that idolatry is treating things the way you should treat people. And we shouldn't get caught up in worshiping money or status or BMWs or whatever the item is that we spend more attention on than things that really matter. So that's one way of interpreting this idolatry prohibition. But I know plenty of Hindu people who have statues in their sanctuaries and may pray to them in some variety. They've generally been pretty good, in my experience. People talk about Catholic Christianity with all of the statuaries and iconography, and in the Middle Ages, Jews had no trouble treating Catholicism like it was idolatry. Because look at all the statues. It looks like idolatry to them. So, again, this is more of a ritual, religious, theological commandment than an ethical pronouncement. If you're treating it in terms of ethics as it affects people. If you're treating it in terms of ethics as it affects religious authority, and I want you to believe the priest is right or the rabbi is right, then sure, you'd like to emphasize this law because it's re-emphasizing the religious authority. I'll also point out the second clause of this. You may have noticed the ethical problematic side of this. I am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, to the third and fourth generation. In other words, if you sin, it might not only hit you, but your kid, and your kid's kid, and your kid's kid's kid. That's not fair. And in fact, later passages in the same Torah will say, God is merciful, he doesn't punish the sons for the father's sins. It cancels this very statement. But this is in that canonical text, the Ten Commandments. Again, you can find a secularized version of this. You could say there are times we know that bad human behavior does get transmitted down generations. Think of child abuse or spanking that then turns into more generations of that kind of child abuse. But that's, again, secularizing the version. This is really looking at a cosmic punishment for that. And there is, of course, the paradox. It says he shows mercy to the thousandth generation of those that love me. Well, what if your grandparent was terrible, but you love him? So how does it play out going down? Which supersedes, the loving or the punishing the sin? That's number 2. Number 3, thou shalt not take the name of Yahweh your God in vain, for Yahweh will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. Don't swear, don't take the Lord's name in vain. Is that ethical? Well, plenty of people do it, right? And it doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. This is something, again, of concern for the religious authorities and for God, but maybe not as it affects relations between people. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you will work and do all of your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to Yahweh your God. In it you will do no manner of work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger in your gates. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore he blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Now, is observing the Sabbath day an ethical commandment? Well, you could frame it that way, because notice who gets the day off.
Everybody.
Not just the landowner, right? It's the children, and the servants, and the animals. They all get a day of rest. There's something valuable about that, I think. And something egalitarian about that not just the person in charge gets to take the day off. Notice it doesn't include your wife. The audience is to a man. Jewish feminists have noted that. Okay. Obviously, as the Sabbath restrictions go in rabbinic law, it becomes very ritual. You know, they're not lighting a fire, and they're not riding too far, and the not destroying things, and not creating things, and not writing, and all of those rabbinic definitions of what it means to do work or to not do work become very ritualized. But you could take the Sabbath day as something, if not ethically positive, certainly psychologically or physiologically wise to take a day off once in a while. I'll also point out that this is a case where the two versions are different. So in Deuteronomy, instead of remember Zachor, it says Shamor at Yom HaShabbat. Remember, keep the Sabbath day or observe the Sabbath day. So the very commandment of what to do is different. Zachor, remember, in Exodus 20, and Shamor, observe, in Deuteronomy 5. And even the reason of why you do it is different as well. If you look at the right column again, this is from Deuteronomy. Remember, you were a slave in Egypt, and Yahweh your God brought you out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore he commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Well, in Exodus it said it was because of creation in 7 days. In Deuteronomy, it's a different reason. Again, this is one of those seam points that scholars might suggest these are different sources. We're telling the Ten Commandments story slightly differently, and then get combined into one document later. Okay, commandment number 5. Honor your mother and your father, that your days will be long upon the land which God gives you. Is that ethical? When you're 5 years old, it's probably wise. Okay? And there is something to be said for continuity of generations, drawing on the wisdom of the elders, and so on. That's of pragmatic survival value. And there's something that many cultures have as well, as we'll talk about, the idea of honoring the elders. Number 6, thou shalt not murder. Okay, now we're in the unambiguously ethical concept, right? And again, common in many cultures as well. Thou shalt not commit adultery, violate bonds of marriage. Keep in mind, though, that in this period, men could be polygamous. They could have more than one wife, so it's not what we think of as adultery necessarily. That's when people say we need to go back to old-fashioned traditional marriage. I think, well, if you read the Bible, that's very different than what you're thinking of. Number 8, thou shalt not steal, so you respect private property. Again, very common sense. Thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor. That's honesty in a court setting or in public. That makes sense. And finally, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's house, or his wife, or his manservant, or his maidservant, or his ox, or his ass, or anything that is your neighbor's. Do not covet. Don't be jealous. Now, is that an ethical commandment? Well, it's tricky. It's kind of not realistic because I can't control what I feel. You know, if he comes up with a brand new car and there's part of me that covets it and is jealous of it, I might never do anything about it. I might never say anything about it, but I felt it. You see, this is one of the challenges of some of the commandments that we'll see, because they don't only command behavior, but they command sometimes belief, and sometimes they command emotions. What's the first line after the Shema in the traditional passage? The Shema Yisrael, Echad, Ve'ahavta, and you will love your God. Now, I don't know how many of you have been married, but it doesn't work to command love. It doesn't work to command feelings. And so to command someone, do not be jealous, do not covet, that's very difficult to enforce. In fact, people can't enforce it at all. Who could possibly enforce a prohibition on coveting? Only someone who knows if you've been sleeping, and knows if you're awake, and knows if you've been bad or good, who sees the hearts of people and can judge what they feel and think, and not just what they do in the outside world. Now again, to give a little bit of credibility to the Ten Commandments here, there is something to be said as an aspiration. You shouldn't cultivate jealousy of those around you. If you do have that feeling, don't act on it. And if you do have those feelings repeatedly, try to work on it with a therapist or find some way to not spend your life longing for things that you can't have. There's all kinds of psychological wisdom to be mined out of that idea of not coveting. But to treat it as a commandment worthy of punishment, reward, that's where it gets complicated. Question in the back.
So I was just going to comment that there's an underlying message that there's always somebody with something better than you. And the underlying message is learn to be satisfied with what you have. And that message. Because, you know, your neighbor's always going to get a new car before you get it. And
right. So perhaps the underlying message is be satisfied with what you have and don't
notice
because there's always be something else.
Notice what you have.
Yeah, exactly. Be sad. And there are rabbinic passages that talk about this as well. Who is rich? The one who's satisfied with his portion and so on. Absolutely that's the case. At the same time, it's framed in language that is problematic to enforce or to understand. Now, some of you may know that according to rabbinic Judaism, there's many more than 10 commandments. After all, remember, there's nothing in here that says light Hanukkah candles, right? But he commanded us to light Hanukkah candles. So the rabbis believe that in the written Torah, there's more than 10 commandments. There's more than 20 commandments. There's more than 100 commandments. There's more than 400 commandments. There are, in fact, 613 commandments. And they're divided into two categories: positive commandments and negative commandments. Positive commandments are things you should do. Honor your mother and father. Remember the Sabbath day. Those are things to do. Some of them are negative commandments, things not to do. Yes?
When you say that there's more than 10 commandments in rabbis, are you talking about the secular humanism rabbis?
No.
Or all rabbis?
Traditional Orthodox rabbis. No. If you read rabbinic literature, the Talmud, the Mishnah, these sources, they're working on expanding all of the commandments that they believe are to be found in the Torah. Now, what's funny about this is they all agree that the number is 613. But they don't agree on what the 613 are. In other words, they picked a number, and then they're working backwards to fill in the agreed upon number. And as we'll see, some of these commandments are things that we would consider good deeds, worthy of emulation. Some of them are sort of irrelevant, not interesting to us because they're very ritual focused. And some of them are patently objectionable to our value system. So the rabbis divide them into positive and negative. You've got the to-do commandments, honor your mother and father. You've got negative commandments, do not murder, do not steal, do not eat forbidden foods, and those kind of categories. They believe that there are 248 positive commandments. They claim that correspond to the number of parts in the body. I don't know that that's verified by modern medical science, but rabbinic medical science claimed there are 248 parts to the body, and of course, their standard is the male body, so who knows how that plays out. What does that leave if you have 613 commandments and 248 positive? How many negative commandments? Anyone do the math in their head? It's 365. Sound familiar? Yeah. So there's something to learn every day of the year, what not to do. You see the image of the rabbi of God as the old man saying no? That's part of the ethos of a world of this many commandments. If there are 613 commandments that you're supposed to follow, how could you possibly follow them all perfectly? In some ways, the system of all these commandments answers a fundamental philosophic question, one that we raised this morning. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, they got all the rules ahead of time. Maybe they just didn't fulfill them all correctly. Maybe they were slacking on the honoring your mother and father, or they didn't light the Hanukkah candles at exactly the right time. When you have this many rules, you're bound to fail. And then that will explain why your kid got run over by the axe cart. Because maybe you messed up, and remember the sin of the fathers can sometimes get paid on the children. So what I also included in the packet is a listing of some of the 613 commandments as Maimonides made his list. Again, other rabbis made their list. They don't always agree on every detail. But I wanted to use this to highlight a few details. Some of the examples that he gives, but also conceptual. You'll sometimes hear people say, Judaism is a religion of deed and not creed. It doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you do what you're supposed to do. That's why we have 613 commandments, because it gives you all the things you need to do, and belief doesn't matter. If anybody tells you that, they haven't actually read the list. At least as Maimonides put it together. And they're not thinking about it in a clear way. After all, a lot of the things you're commanded to do are prayers you're commanded to recite. And a lot of those prayers you're commanded to recite include beliefs in them. In the Amidah, the standing prayer, the third blessing blesses God for resurrecting the dead. Now, I've not seen that happen, except on television. We call that zombies, right? It's the dead back to life. But it hasn't happened in our experience, so you're blessing a God for doing something that He will do in the future, you believe. It's a statement of belief, framed as a blessing that you're required to recite. It's almost like a creed. So there has always been a sense of belief involved in Jewish life. It's never been just deed, and the kind of deeds they command in their list of mitzvot, some are relevant to us, and again, some you may find alienating. So let's take a look through the list. Number 1, to know there is a God. Number 2, not to even think there are other gods besides Him. Know that He is one. Love Him, fear Him, sanctify His name. Do not profane His name. Do not destroy objects associated with His name. Listen to the prophet speaking in His name. Do not test the prophet unduly. Emulate His ways. Cleave to those who know. So the first 12 commandments are all related to God and belief in God, and have nothing to do with your fellow human being. Number 13, love other Jews. Oh, okay. Love converts. Okay. Not to hate fellow Jews. Okay. Reprove a sinner. That's good. Someone's doing something wrong, correct them. Try to get them back on the straight and narrow. Do not embarrass others. Really good. Do not oppress the weak. Do not speak derogatorily of others. Don't take revenge. Don't bear a grudge. Well, there's a lot of good ones in there too, after the ones that we didn't like. Honor those who know and teach Torah. I'll endorse that one. Don't inquire into idolatry. Don't follow the whims of your heart or what your eyes see. Don't blaspheme. Don't worship idols as they are worshipped. Don't worship idols the way we worship God. Don't make an idol for yourself. Don't make an idol for others. Don't even make human forms for decorative purpose. This is often read as a prohibition on Jewish art, an art that would represent the human form. Do not turn a city to idolatry. Burn a city that has turned to idol worship. So goodbye New Delhi. Do not rebuild it as a city. Do not derive benefit from it. Do not love the idolater. Do not cease hating the idolater. Do not save the idolater. Do not say anything in the idolater's defense. Do not refrain from incriminating the idolater. Do not prophesy in the name of idolatry. Obviously, a jealous God is a jealous God. There's a whole number of other following prohibition on idolatry, the next several commandments. We'll jump forward to number 62. Do not engage in astrology. Don't read your horoscope. Do not attempt to contact the dead. Do not perform acts of magic. Men must not shave off the hair on the sides of their heads. That's what's called the payas, that the Orthodox Jews wear. Men must not shave their beards with a razor. Believe it or not, this one comes up. You may notice that there are Jews who call themselves Orthodox who are shaven, right? Modern Orthodox Jews. What they do is they use electric razors. Because then the razor doesn't touch your skin because of the screen. And that's how they're able to maintain a shaven face but still feel like they're fulfilling the commandments because they're not touching, a razor will not touch your skin, it says. So the razor doesn't touch their skin. It just comes that close through the screen and trims off the beard. Men must not wear women's clothing. Women must not wear men's clothing. Do not tattoo the skin. By the way, that one's been let go. So if you know people with tattoos, they can be buried in Jewish cemeteries. Yep. Well, some of it was post-Holocaust, because what are they going to do with all those people? Right. But also, this was done in an era where the tattooing was thought to be part of worshiping idols, and now it's seen as simply artistic and whatever. It's not recommended. You know, your bubby might still have a heart attack, but it's not a prohibition if you talk to Jewish cemeteries about it. Do not tear the skin in mourning. Do not make a bald spot in mourning. 76. Say the Shema twice daily. Serve the Almighty with daily prayer. So again, you're commanded to say things. You're commanded to recite things. Not necessarily commandments as doing good things. Here's putting on tefillin, the phylacteries, putting a mezuzah on the doorpost. Each male must write a Torah scroll. If you haven't gotten on that, I'd get cracking. The king must have a separate Sefer Torah for himself. 86, circumcise all males on the 8th day after their birth. Rest on the Sabbath day, the 7th day. And other rules related to Shabbat. The sanctifying the day with Kiddush and Havdalah, the beginning and the end of Shabbat. Follow the rules for Yom Kippur, follow the rules for Passover, etc. Then we get to the series of sexual prohibitions. This is in Leviticus 18. Again, read on the high holidays. No sexual relations with your mother. No sexual relations with your father's wife, because that could be your stepmother. No sexual relations with your sister or your father's wife daughter. No relations with your son's daughter or with your daughter. These occur to people? I mean, they have to make a rule about it. No sexual relations with your daughter's daughter. Not with a woman and her daughter. Not with a woman and her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter. No relations with your father's sister or your mother's sister or your father's brother's wife or your son's wife or your brother's wife or your wife's sister. Did you realize you've been fulfilling all these commandments your whole life? No relations with an animal. A woman must not have sexual relations with an animal. And no homosexual relations with your father's brother, no relations with someone else's wife, with a menstrually impure woman, and do not marry outside. These are all on the list of ritual commandments. I'm not going to go through all of these. And as I said, I've already edited down quite a bit from the list of 613. again, you have some good examples and some bad examples and some objectionable examples. So, do not let a mamzer, which is a child born to an illegal relationship, marry into the Jewish people. So if you're a child as a result of adultery, you are in this category of bastard, mamzer, you're not allowed to be married into a mainstream Jewish family. Now, you might think, by the way, that this is sort of ridiculous and academic and who cares, but guess who's running the marriage laws in the state of Israel? The Orthodox establishment that wants to follow all these rules. So if you're categorized by them as a mamzer, you have challenges. They won't allow a Kohen, a priest, to marry a woman who's been married before, because he's supposed to be technically marrying a virgin. And so, if you want to marry a divorced woman and your name is Cohen, that might be a challenge for you too. So these are not simply academic historical details. These have a real life impact on real people even today. Some of them are the more sort of obscure ones. If you look at 233 on the right side, do not plant diverse seeds together, so you shouldn't plant corn and wheat in the same field. Do not plant grains or greens in a vineyard. Do not crossbreed animals. Don't plow with a sheep and an ox together. Do not wear shatnez, a cloth woven of wool and linen together in one garment. This is all part of the rabbinic categorizing of this belongs here and this belongs there. Just like women don't wear men's clothing and men don't wear women's clothing. Don't plow with two different animals. Don't put in two different kinds of seeds together. There are sets of separations. And then immediately following this, we have another series of very nice laws. Leave the corner of the field uncut for the poor. You know, when you're plowing a square field with a team of oxen, you make the corner, there's going to be a little bit left over, right, when you make the round turn. Leave that for the poor. Leave the gleanings, any wheat that falls to the ground. Leave it on the ground. Do not gather the gleanings. Leave the gleanings of a vineyard, and don't gather those either. It's nice how they pair them up like this. You can do 2 for 1, right? If you leave the gleanings, you're not gathering the gleanings. So you get a double. Leave the forgotten sheaves in the field. Separate the tithes for the poor. Give to charity, and do not withhold charity from the poor. So, again, another set of nice, ethical, generous laws as part of the list of commandments. Do not steal money stealthily. Ensure your scales and weights are accurate.
Obviously.
Do not commit injustice with scales and weights. Don't move a boundary marker to steal someone's property. Don't kidnap. Don't rob openly. Don't withhold wages. Again, another set of wonderful ethics. But sometimes a difference between Jewish slaves and non-Jewish slaves. Jewish slaves get freed every 7 years. But non-Jewish slaves have to work forever. And so on. So this is Maimonides' list of the 613 commandments. Again, you're welcome to browse through the rest from the packet on your own time. But what this highlights for us is that they have this long list of commandments. And for them, it's commanded from the commander. When we think today of doing a mitzvah, if you change the emphasis on the word from mitzvah to mitzvah, we often would translate mitzvah not as commandment, but more like good deed, right? He did a mitzvah. He helped her with her taxes. Now, that's not anywhere on Maimonides' list, helping someone file their taxes. But he did a mitzvah as a good deed. That's what we think of when we think of mitzvot. When the Reform movement started in the 19th century, one of their challenges was they wanted to reject a lot of this ritual commandments. They liked the ethical laws, but they didn't need all the dietary laws and tefillin and the purity and all that stuff. And so one of the changes they made in many Reform communities was they stopped celebrating bar mitzvah. Because bar mitzvah meant you were of the age of fulfilling all the commandments. And they didn't care about the ritual commandments anymore. They created a new ceremony for coming of age called confirmation. And in many Reform temples into the 1930s and 40s, they didn't have bar and bat mitzvahs, they only had confirmations. At a certain point in the 50s and 60s, enough Eastern European Jews, more traditional background Jews, had joined Reform temples. They brought back the bar mitzvah, and for a while you'd have bar mitzvahs for boys and girls having confirmation a little bit later. But that was a response to this question of what do we mean by mitzvah? If mitzvah is commandment, then there's nothing we can do. A lot of secular Jewish schools We're talking Zionist schools, we're historical Yiddish socialist schools. They also had nothing to do with bar mitzvah at all, because that was religious and that was commandment. You want to hire a rabbi and do it on the side, fine, but we're not going to do it. It took some time to get used to this concept of mitzvah as good deed, as a broader category than simply the ritual commandments set forth by the rabbis. But once you start talking about good deeds as defining doing Jewish, then you have to clarify. After all, if I give to charity, there are other people who aren't Jewish who also give to charity. Are they doing Jewish? What makes my giving to charity doing Jewish and not theirs? There are other cultures that honor the elderly, that emphasize education, that would not oppress the worker. What makes this value a Jewish value? So I wrote this article some years ago on the question of, are there Jewish values? What would be some examples of Jewish values that you hear people talk about as, these are good Jewish values? Anybody want to suggest a few?
Education.
Education, that's a Jewish value. What else? There's room at the table for one more person, and food equals love. Yes.
Doing good deeds, doing things that make others, that benefit others.
You're doing things to benefit other people.
Give to the poor.
So giving charity to the poor in some variety. Other examples of Jewish values? The idea of tikkun olam, or repairing the world, which in mystical thought was very different from what we think of today, but that's a whole other conversation. How about segregating men and women? Is that a Jewish value? Well, sure. If you look at the earliest collection of rabbinic law, it has different sections. They're called orders. So the Mishnah has an order for seeds, all the agricultural laws, and an order for nizikin, for damages, all the issues of torts and legal cases. And it has a whole separate section called nashim, women, to cover all those odd legal circumstances that are the exception to the norm. There's the purity laws over menstrual impurity. There's going into any traditional synagogue in Europe or in Israel or even an Orthodox synagogue here, and you have this section called the Ezrat Nashim, which literally means the help of women, but it's the women's section. It's usually in the back. It's usually set off by a screen. And women don't get to carry the Torah, and they don't get to read from the Torah. They're defined out of some of those public commandments. You see that 613 list? That applies to men. Women are exempt from some of the specific commandments. And they just happen to be the commandments that would be done in public, like reading a Torah scroll, reading a Megillah. The thought is, well, they're busy with the kids, so we'll let them do that. Well, that's a Jewish value too. Suspicion of the outsider. Rejection of same-sex relationships. We saw that. Those are Jewish values too. You see, it's too self-serving to say that Jewish values equals what my values are. Wow, what a coincidence. Jewish values are all the things that I think are good. Well, but that's not really complete. You're not reading the whole source here. After all, American values, if we thought, what are American values? That could include democracy. That could include equal treatment under the law, no establishment of religion. Right? That can include slavery. That can include dispossession of Native Americans. That can include, by the way, a democracy that only allowed male landowners to vote in most of the states when the Constitution was ratified. They didn't remove property requirements for voting until the 1840s. They didn't allow women to vote until the 1920s. They didn't allow black women to vote in most states until the Civil Rights era in the 1960s. Remember, women's emancipation was white women's emancipation in the 1920s. So those are American values too. It's too self-serving to say that American values equals the good stuff. The full subset might be broader. So part of what we have to do when we're thinking about Jewish values is answer that question of, maybe the values are universal. After all, love your neighbor as yourself is a very well-known Jewish statement. Jesus also says in the New Testament, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Hillel says, that which is hateful to you, do not do to your brother. Lao Tzu, who probably never read the Bible, said, love the world as your own self, then you can truly care for all things. Confucius, who also likely never read the Bible, said, what you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others. And Immanuel Kant, who did read the Bible, but was a secular philosopher, said, act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will it should become a universal law. That's like the most readable Kant you can find. He's terrible. Don't bother. But what he's saying is the same thing that all these other people are saying, which is, you don't like it, don't do it to other people. Have sympathy, have empathy. Put yourself in their shoes. It doesn't require the Bible to get that conclusion. So maybe the values are just in different vocabulary. One said it in Chinese, one said it in Hebrew, but it's the same value. Well, that's problematic too. You see, there are some values that are part of some cultures and other values that are part of other cultures, and they weight them differently. Ethicists have done surveys across national boundaries to see what people will react to common ethical dilemmas. The most famous example is called the runaway trolley. So there's a trolley that has no brakes, and it's running down the track, and there's a switch track up ahead. You can't stop the train, but you could switch to the right or the left. And on the right side, there's a solitary baby in a baby carriage. And on the left side, there are 5 escaped criminals. And the question is, what do you do? And some people would say, I'll wipe out those criminals because I'm going to save the baby. Some people will say, 1 life is less than 5 lives, so I'm going to go to the other side. Some will say, I can't make a decision, I won't play God, and whatever happens, happens, even if the trolley derails and it takes me too. Others will say, what if the baby grows up to be Hitler? And then they go on to other ways to complicate the scenario. But when they ask those questions in Japan, and in India, and in the United States, and in Latin America, they sometimes get very different answers. And why they get different answers is because different cultures emphasize different values. Some emphasize the collective over the individual. Some emphasize honoring the past instead of living out your own values. One example that strikes us as terrible, but our version would strike others as terrible. Let's say you're in a government job, and you have the opportunity to hire somebody. In our culture, you would have a blind audition process where people sign up, and if anyone that you were related to applied for the job, you would recuse yourself and not be part of the decision. In many other parts of the world, if you have a job to hire for, you're going to hire your cousin. Because you can trust him, and you know he's going to do the job because he's part of the family. And why would you hire a stranger? Because the family loyalty supersedes the treat everybody the same. Both cultures have both values, but they weight them very differently. So values might be universal, and yet different cultures emphasize different values to different degrees. Another example, Jews have the commandment of memory, to remember. It's a very deeply rooted commandment. We saw it a lot of times in Maimonides' list, remember the Sabbath day. Other cultures do not emphasize memory the same way. The Roma people, sometimes called gypsies, they do not emphasize cultural memory, historical memory the same way. And so it's harder to reconstruct their history because they moved and they don't keep track of where they've been. It's not something they value as much. So I think it is fair to say that there are Jewish values, but there may be sort of like a Venn diagram. There's all Jewish values, there's my values, and then there's the overlap of the two, and that's my Jewish values. So maybe segregating men and women is a traditional Jewish value, and equal treatment of men and women is my value. That's not going to be in the overlap space. But not treating the stranger poorly because they're a foreigner is my value and a Jewish value. So that's in the overlap space, that's part of my Jewish values. It's a little more complicated. We'd like the easier version, right? We'd like to say there are Jewish values and here are the 10 Jewish values and aren't they all wonderful and woohoo! But it doesn't always work that way. You see, the Jews don't have the patent on ethics. We didn't invent it. The Jews don't have a monopoly on ethics. We're not the only ones that know how to be good. In fact, we can sometimes learn from other people too. So that's a quick survey of doing good, doing Jewish, and what counts as ethical values. I'm curious for your thoughts on this and your experiences. It's just about 3 o'clock now, so we can have time for some Q&A, and then we'll take a short break before we come back to talk about another version of doing Jewish, which is the use of symbols, rituals, and ritual objects, which also has an impact on how we behave. Yes?
Could you include respect your teachers in Jewish values?
Respecting your teachers, I would say, is a Jewish value and a Chinese value, and again, it can be more than one category, right? It's like cross-listing in the library. It can be in more than one place, more than one culture can articulate it. You see, you're right, it's a great example, because all these values don't come out of the sky. They didn't come down from God to Moses on Sinai. They were derived from the human experience. And if they're derived from the human experience that has learned that honoring your elders and your teachers leads to better results, and therefore is good for society, we've defined it as a good thing to do. It affirms human dignity, and it's good for our sense of self, whatever reasons we've given for it. Then you can find it in more than one culture, because they're dealing with the same human experience. They don't always agree. Sometimes their message is different. You know, the message might be, if you look at the world today, you should honor your kids. Why? Because they're going to take care of you. At some point, the shoe's on the other foot, and they're the ones that can program the VCR. They're the ones that can help you explain how your phone works. I mean, in some ways, we honor the youth more than the elderly, because your skills of the punch card computer system is not useful anymore. It doesn't help anybody. So this is the process of development, is understanding that if it comes from the human experience, and we define what's good from what's useful and productive, that means that has to shift sometimes. That means we may broaden our category of who we count as not the stranger. This is one other example of how interpretation makes a big difference. Remember that value that said, love the stranger as yourself, not oppress the stranger because you were strangers in Egypt? The word for stranger in the Hebrew Bible is ger. Gimel resh, ger. In rabbinic interpretation, they took ger to mean convert. So it's not a universal ethic for the rabbis of love the stranger, whoever the stranger may be. It becomes an in-group ethic of love the stranger who joined the group, not anybody you happen across. So it takes a universal ethic and makes it more parochial. We might like to go back to the original meaning more than the rabbinic interpretation of it. That's where, again, the power to interpret changes, and Jewish values can be different. I mean, the Bible's Jewish values are different from the rabbi's Jewish values, because the rabbis have made it more limited. And that's where I find the discussion of Jewish values to be eye-opening, and also it demonstrates something about where people get their values from. The last point to make, and I know it was a long answer to a short question. When I'm looking at the Bible, I don't live by biblical values. Some of you may have read that book by A.J., I forget his last name, The Year of Living, A.J. Jacobs, The Year of Living Biblically, where he tried to follow all the laws of the Bible for a whole year. And I don't know if he stoned his neighbor who was gathering sticks on the Sabbath or not. I mean, that's one of the rules you're supposed to follow. But I don't consider myself as living biblical values. I might find some of my values echoed in my sources, but who's making the choice here? I'm not doing it only because it's in the Bible. I'm doing it because I agree with it. Because there's plenty in the Bible I don't agree with, and I don't follow. So that's where we have to think about, where are these coming from, and are we quoting an old source because we like the fact that our people had that insight so many generations ago, or are we doing it just because it said so? Just because the source has the commandment. Yes, in the back. So she says that being Jewish and doing Jewish is not a separate category for Orthodox because it's everything that you do. Well, it's not entirely true. They do read the newspaper once in a while. I mean, and Orthodox is a wide variety. There's ultra-Orthodox, there's modern Orthodox, and everything in between. You're right that primarily what they try to do are things that are defined as Jewish. I I think that that's a limiting experience. I think that that cuts you off from a lot of wonderful things out there in the human family. I mean, if nothing else, chicken parmesan. I mean, that's really good. Hollywood movies are sometimes terrible, but sometimes really moving and profound. There's something to be said from experiencing other cultures and being part of the broader world of humanity, that you're limited by reading the Talmud again and reading the Torah again. It's a limited orbit. And that's why there are people who leave Orthodoxy. One of the most interesting results of that survey, of the Pew 2013 study, it showed that about half of the people who were raised Orthodox are no longer Orthodox. So they may have 5, 6, 7 or more kids, but half of them, over the course of their lifetime, may migrate away from living an Orthodox lifestyle. They still tend to be Jewish of some variety, but it's not necessarily Orthodox, because that lifestyle has its limitations too. Every solution has its problems. There is no version of Judaism that avoids kvetching or kvetching. So if that's the case, then we make the best of what we see to be most important. Yes, in the back of that.
So, by tomorrow morning, are we going to have some sort of a form that our group would follow, or are you going to leave us with all of this that we will continue to argue about, because every table here has a different background that they came from and a different feeling. Now, you've made a lot of things clear, sort of, to me, but it seems like a big mishmash. Are you going to have an answer to any of this?
Well, he's saying, why are you asking all these questions? What about some answers? Why don't you just tell me what to do? Well, what kind of a humanistic rabbi would I be if I just told you what to do?
Then we all got the point now, I think.
I hope so.
What are we going to do tomorrow?
Again, one of our values in humanistic Judaism is making up your own mind, right? Thinking for yourself. And unfortunately, I'm not going to do that for you. So you have to live sometimes with indeterminacy, or, even more important, with dialogue and consensus. So rather than have me from outside impose a solution and leave town, I leave you with questions and ideas that you have to discuss and come to a consensus among yourselves. And maybe you'll agree to disagree, and that's okay too. You can live in diversity. That's part of the conversation tomorrow too. Again, I don't want to give you the easy answers, because there are no easy answers, and because I can't impose those answers on you. And it may be that you have a different answer from the neighbors at your table. And the table on this side is a totally different perspective of what the issue is, and that's fine. You see, if we value Jewish culture and Jewish values, and we say that asking questions and arguing and discussing is an important part of Jewish cultures and values, then why would I give you all the answers? Let's celebrate that part of Jewish culture too. Yes, sir.
And as a rabbi, what were the Jewish values you gave your children?
As a parent and a rabbi, what were the Jewish values you gave your children? I gave them Jewish experiences. I tried to live out what I thought would be good values. I didn't go through life quoting the Bible as I did things. So as I wrote a check or filled out an online form to make a donation, I didn't say, and it says in the Bible that thou shalt give. I didn't go through in that kind of citation way. I think I did it by living example, and also by the experiences they had. So in our Sunday school, they often will do community service projects as part of what they're doing. We did a whole discussion on making your own tzedakah box recently. And we talked about what tzedakah is and how you choose and how you prioritize. We looked at Maimonides' list of his hierarchy, what's called the ladder of charity, what's the most praiseworthy version and less, and so on. And they had a chance to discuss and think about that. So they learned about the Jewish value of tzedakah, but also to understand that it doesn't only apply to giving to Jewish institutions. It doesn't only, you don't always have to be thinking about doing it Jewishly to be doing it. So we didn't go through in a conscious way and go through Maimonides' list and circle the ones that we wanted to do. That's not how it worked. We wanted to convey Jewish experience and identity, but also to give them a chance to do Jewish with other people in sort of a low-key Jewish way. It didn't have to be flagged and highlighted every time. Yes, one more and then we'll take our break.
So as you can see, our community is older.
older, post-baby boomers,
Experienced, wiser.
not dealing with Sunday school and
Right.
teenagers and all that kind of stuff. How do we fit in the other organizations that you've?
Well, about half of the congregations that are affiliated with the Society for Humanistic Judaism don't have a school. Either they don't have enough people to do it, or they're an older community. So this is not unusual to have a community like this. And as I was saying to some people at lunch, you don't expect the senior center to run a kids program. I mean, if what you are is an adult community of adult learners, then that's fine. At the same time, if you do decide you want to reach out to that audience of people that are adults with kids and provide some services for them, it doesn't have to start at a 30 times a year school. You could start with a kids Hanukkah party and a kids Passover party, and you sort of build the connections from there. But really, the community is what serves the needs of its members. So include a school, don't include a school, that's up to you. Don't forget also that Jewish learning is not just for those under age 13. I mean, it can be a lifelong process. There's plenty of things that adults can learn too. I mean, you might even find it interesting. There are some people here who have told me they didn't grow up with very much Jewish background, they never learned to read Hebrew. That's a great opportunity. Take people who do know how to read Hebrew in the community and have them run a beginning Hebrew class for people who are learning how to read Hebrew, if they wanted to. That might be fun. It might be interesting. It might expand your sense of knowledge. You never stop learning, hopefully. And so, as I suggest, well, Jewish values are not only for kids. Doing Jewish is not only for kids. We do ourselves a disservice if we think that Purim is a kid's holiday. First of all, read the book of Esther. It is not for children. If we think Hanukkah is only about the kids. If we think Passover is only... No, these are all holidays and experiences and observances that can be meaningful at any age. This is not just like Barney on Ice, which you endure for your kid's sake and you would never go to as an adult for your own choice. This can be what's meaningful to you. And adult Purim celebrations are fantastic. First of all, because you can drink, which is one of the goals. And you can have fun. And you can make adult jokes. And so there's all kinds of things that are opened up for an adult-only community that I wouldn't minimize. I think it could be very meaningful.